This podcast is brought to you by Kempower, the reliable, quick, and scalable EV charging solutions for everyone and everywhere. And StarCharge, the largest EV charging manufacturer in the world, and is also a provider of residential and commercial battery storage. Working in this space that is pushing how we electrify most parts of our lives, and especially how we get around, I pay close attention to the news, but also the perception of those around me when it comes to EVs, renewable energies, and the like. I often hear skeptics questioning the ability of our grid to handle the impending EV revolution. Naysayers or just curious folk really raise their concerns, wondering if our power infrastructure is ready for the surge of EVs on our roads. And this is a topic that I find especially interesting, and one that we are going to dive into today with a wonderfully experienced guest. Welcome back to the Out of Spec podcast. I'm your host, Francie, and today I am joined by the one and only Dan Bowermaster, head of the Electric Vehicle Research Program at EPRI, or EPRI, as I learned that y'all call it, which is a nonprofit and independent research organization, aka the Electric Power Research Institute. So thank you so much for joining me today, Dan.
Thanks for having me here, Francie. Look forward to the discussion.
Me too. I really do find this space so curious, especially because there's a lot of opinions, which there's always opinions really when it comes to topics of electric vehicles and electrifying things. So first, to familiarize our audience and myself with your background, I would love for you to just give me a quick summary of your background, how you got to EPRI, and then, of course, your work there and how it relates to your current role.
Sure. So as a kid, I always loved cars and, studied engineering in college and got to intern at a BMW factory and then at Porsche R&D in college. It was kind of a dream come true. And then, worked in manufacturing for about 7 years, then went to grad school, and after grad school ended up at Pacific Gas and Electric on the West Coast. And my last stint there was running their electric vehicle and natural gas vehicle program, which is right around the time when the Nissan Leaf and the Chevy Volt launched. So we got the utility all ready for that. Moved over to EPRI about 12 years ago to join their electric transportation team. And EPRI itself, most people have never heard of. We're been around for more than 50 years. As you said, we're a nonprofit group. We kind of do research, applied research on the grid, from where electricity is made to how it's used. Again, for the good of society. Our group, Electric Transportation, has been around for, we're on our 34th year now. And if you're thinking, wait, electric cars weren't around 34 years ago, you're exactly right. So we do everything from forklifts to seaport cranes to obviously, cars and trucks and things that go. Everything from vehicle co-development, although as time has passed, there's less of that, to charging station, grid integration, environmental economic analysis, et cetera. And one of the great things about working at EPRI is, there's a department that's an expert on grid planning. There's a department that's an expert on transmission. There's a department that's expert on batteries. So we work with a lot of great people here at the Institute, as well as across the just entire electric vehicle industry.
That is amazing. And it is surprising, been around for 5 decades and perhaps aren't super, super known in the space, but obviously you have, your hands in a lot of the really important jars here. And it is important to remember that, the first electric vehicles maybe weren't the passenger ones, but still an important part of the electric vehicle evolution, revolution, whatever you want to call it, especially as we work towards minimizing the greenhouse gases that are emitted by, ICE cars, internal combustion engine cars. So your role there is the head of the Electric Vehicle Research Program, right? So what does that mean? What are you heading?
So our mission is to electrify transportation for the good of society as quickly as possible. And what that has really evolved into, I touched on some of the other kind of historical things, is that we are looking at what is needed to get EVs to scale again, as quickly as possible. There's state and federal goals, the 50% sales by 2030, et cetera. And really helping, I think the major focus right now across the industry, and especially at EPRI, is what data and facts are needed in order to give certainty to industry leaders and regulators to allow for specific grid investment ahead of time, such that the grid will be ready. It's a common, or maybe uncommon, but sometimes you'll hear over Thanksgiving dinner or something like, hey, the grid's not ready for EVs, or the grid's going to, EVs are going to crash the grid. And that's typical, but it's not really how it's going to work. It's more about how do you how do you quickly get the grid ready at minimal cost? At the end of the day, cost to invest in the grid, that comes back to the rates that we all pay. So yes, one answer is to go out and reinforce everywhere on the grid, but that takes time and that takes money. And that's a solution, probably not the best one.
How cool. Yes, one part of the work that you do that I think is really important is that you're nonprofit and independent, because there's a lot of, you could say that people have agendas or different motivations, and to have research coming from an unbiased source, an independent source, I think is really important. There's a nonprofit newspaper, for instance, where my hometown is, Memphis, and it's called the Daily Memphian. And that's really a part of what they push, because no one's paying for them to cover any certain news or not cover news, because when you're trying to, go after your certain mission or goals, or really objectively inform the public or inform decision makings, it's really important to have your independence. So I would imagine that that really plays into the work that you do and why folks would partner with you. Is that true?
Yeah, that's exactly spot on. Like we don't do any lobbying, which actually makes regulators and other government staff want to talk to us more. And we'll never say, oh, do policy A versus do policy B. Well, if someone asks us like, well, what, about a certain topic, we'll talk about the research that we've done or the research that somebody else has done, and what were the data and kind of results from that. But again, we'll never lobby for one or the other.
Interesting. Okay, good to know. You hear that, audience? So maybe let's start with painting a broad picture of utilities and the EV transition. From what you've seen, do utilities generally support the EV transition?
Well, it's definitely a huge opportunity for the entire utility industry. I mean, it's been, this last major uptick in load has been kind of goes back to air conditioning, different forms of industrialization. And this goes back again to, the status quo we're all used to. The grid really came into being in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, some of the 60s. And there was just major growth year after year, decade after decade. And then there were several decades of what one might call semi either low or flat growth. So what we're all used to in our lifetime is low growth. But here, this electrification load, and it's not just transportation electrification load, it's also from buildings and other, industrial forms that are also electrifying. This is the first major uptick in load that a lot of the utilities have seen in a long time. Now, that being said, utilities are really good at, doing everything they need to do from all parts of the grid to make sure enough electricity is generated and moved around. Now, there are complications to that, and how quickly, and again, it goes back to cost. The industry can do, build new transmission lines or that sort of thing. But definitely, it's one of the biggest. It's a change. It's a change in the industry. But for those who have been around a long time, they kind of smile because, well, this is how it used to be.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So, so utilities, you see that there's a clear opportunity for them, but there is a cost to that opportunity, right? And so, what have you noted that utilities need to do to support the EV transition? Is it more about information? Is it truly building out the grid? Is it, regulation and policies? What are the major factors?
Well, there's how much time do we have? There's multiple challenges. The good news is that at least on the kind of individual personal vehicles, and this kills me as a car guy. The cars sit around, and there's data on this, 20 plus hours a day. So there's actually quite a bit of call it parking time to plug in. It's like your smartphone, right? I don't think very few of us think about how long it takes to charge our smartphone. We just know chargers must sitting there at our office desk or on the kitchen counter or what have you overnight or whatever you can do. And that's kind of how cars are. So it's about how do you do that last 10 feet? How do you get charging to the cars? Now, our European friends, they're already at, what we would call 240 volts here in the States. They're close to that. So they already have their household voltage is already at an advantage. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is how do you do that 120 volt, 240 volt charging to make it easy on customers where their cars are parked, whether it's home or work or et cetera. Now, where it gets challenging is, I'm sure we can all think of the road trip example, or if you're on the business side, if you have a fleet. And then the example that's often held up is the kind of either regional trucking or long haul trucking, coast to coast. My grandpa used to be a truck driver. I get it. Those are point challenges. But again, it's easy to forget that utilities provide electricity right now to customers like that. Now, it might be a building or a housing development or a factory, but utilities are used to providing big loads in certain locations. Again, it's more of a question of timing. So that's understanding how and where customers are going to go and charge, as well as kind of companies' plans, is the first one of the first major steps to understanding, okay, where should utilities, invest and harden the grid.
Interesting. So would they work with how would they gain that information? Is it they independently gather it? Is it stuff from, organizations like you? Is it charge point operators being like, this is where we see utilization, where we're going to put in a site and focusing in on that?
It's all the above. There are great models out there. The national labs have models. There's public data on travel data and things like that. One of our major efforts right now is the EVs to Scale project, which includes everything from the truck makers to major fleets to major utilities, looking at how do you, on one hand, confidentially get specific investment plans for those different groups I just mentioned, such that utilities can then check their grid. And the reason why is, again, it comes down to the feeder level. So kind of think of in gross terms like, your neighborhood series of wires and poles, that sort of thing, but might serve an industrial park or things like that. So how do utilities know, thanks to like information from the major fleets and trucking companies, which of those to invest in and when and how much, right? So that's the challenge, right? There's tons of models out there, and models are great at the very high level. They're great for like how much electricity do we need to generate and how much do we need to move around. But when it comes down to like, city, county, kind of like your local investment plan, that's where this detailed data comes in. And again, like you got to protect everything from individual privacy to kind of business information. But that's what this large EVs to Scale effort really gets at.
Okay, that's a cool project that you have going on, and I'd love to hear about more. And it makes me think of something that I was reading about. But of course, this space requires a lot of standardization, and we're not even, done with it. I mean, it's still very much in progress. We are very much a work in progress. So has your work had anything to do with the standards that we see in charging? And if so, how?
Yeah, so first thing, grossly, EPRI does not do standards. That being said, due to our reputation, the industries, meaning the vehicle industry and the utility industry, asked folks on our team to chair various standards committees. I'm sure many of your audience has heard of J1772. There's a gentleman on our team who chairs that. We're also involved in everything from the wireless charging to the truck and bus overhead charging standards. So we participate and lead a variety of SAE standard committees. We're involved in cybersecurity, that sort of thing. Again, most people just want to know that stuff works. But yeah, so we're heavily involved in standards. But again, it's more as the referee and not as like saying, oh, do this or do that. And we can talk more about fast charging and adapters and DACs and whatever you think is interesting to you.
I mean, it's all interesting. It's just making me think like I want to keep this like a nice broad overview, but it would be great because we could have, a whole conversation about adapters, a whole conversation about all the different parts, which I was talking to Kyle about earlier, because he was like, oh man, I wish I could participate in that, but we'll just have to have Dan on again. I was like, okay, for sure. I haven't even met him yet, but it sounds good. So I have a question. Can the grid, as we know it now, support EVs if everyone switched? I mean, not today. I know that's the answer, but like in 2030, the National Renewable Energy Lab has estimated like 30 to 42 million light duty vehicles on the road will be EVs. I don't know what projections y'all are looking at, but can the grid, as we know it now, support that?
Yeah, so I would say the grid and the process that lets the grid change over time would support that. I mean, really grossly, these are gross estimations. If every vehicle, big and small, was electrified overnight, the grid would have to get between 35 and 40% bigger. Now, the good news is that won't happen overnight, which gives the utilities enough time to plan and adjust and, the whole stakeholder process to work itself out. Now, that being said, there's going to be points, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, where like, some fleet, there's different fleets that are being more aggressive than others. So that's where the challenge comes in is the transition. But grossly speaking, it's within, and again, if you looking historically, the grid's grown at that rate in decades past. Now, it might have been not 10 years ago, you might have to go back 30, 40 years, but no, it's all within the realm of I call business as usual.
Okay. So as utilities are going along with making this change, which it seems like, come along or you're going to be left behind. There's no choice really, right? They have to adapt.
Yeah, I mean, utilities are responsible for serving their load that their customers ask for. So it's how
Exactly.
it works.
Okay, good. I mean, 'cause that's great. And I know that some of the systems that they have are outdated from the different businesses that I've seen out there working to help utilities catch up and update, whether it's their softwares or their strategies or whatever. But are utilities focusing more? Do you think they're like, okay, we have to quickly adapt to meet the fleet or the passenger vehicles, or is it a mix?
It's a mix. It really kind of depends on the size and scope of the utilities and where the utilities are at. Some utilities are, you know, have a mix of customers, some rural, some urban, some suburban, some have more than the other, some have more industrial, something like that. I would say in my experience, um, looking back, the initial concern when the vehicles first came out was the light duty ones. I mean, first of all, there weren't many, kind of commercial or industrial or vehicles out there yet, and so it was a concern. And what it's kind of come down to is, the Teslas or Fords or Chevys or Nissans electric vehicles, they're all largely like air conditioners. I mean,
Hmm.
that's a gross comparison, but they move around, and where are they
Yeah.
going to charge? And at least I'll speak for myself. Like, I'm much more emotionally attached to my car than I am if I had an air conditioner. So
True.
there's that emotional piece that we don't have to our air conditioner or hot water, or heat pump or what have you. So there's
Hmm.
that. So I wouldn't say so I'd say utilities are far less concerned about the residential vehicle load. Now there are some questions as the vehicles get bigger and the onboard charging levels increase. And what's that going to have? Also, how will the behavior of the mass market reflect or not reflect the behavior of the early adopters? Where we found like things like, if it's cheaper, if utility offers a rate where it's cheaper to charge at night, many electric vehicle, at least the early adopters, would take advantage of that. It's unknown. It's unclear if the mass market will or won't, and what that means for the grid. It's more about these kind of like the fleet specific loads that are showing up. And again, they're high powers, they're big numbers. And again, very few people think in terms of megawatts or megawatt hours. We can think about a gallon of gas, and that's kind of about it for most
Yeah.
normal people. But the point is, like, despite the big numbers, or you'll see like, oh, this transit bus yard is equivalent as a skyscraper, or this truck stop is equivalent of that small town, or whatever the comparison is. Like, I think the important thing to remember is, like, yeah, those are big loads and big numbers, but they're all loads that utilities serve equivalents of today. So it's nothing. We're not talking about having to create some magic grid. It's more about thoughtfully and quickly expanding the grid we have.
Hmm. Thoughtful and quick. And I'm sure that does require a lot of collaboration. And when I think about how the utilities sector is in the US, it's regulated, right? It's a regulated market versus like in Europe or the UK, which is it's not. Do you know the specific differences that especially I think a lot of our audience is in the US, but to draw like just maybe briefly draw the difference with what might be more of a challenge in our market than in others?
Yeah. So first of all, in the U.S., there's about 3,300 different utilities. So
Yeah.
there's just a big number to begin with. And then, yeah, there's, you know, three or four basically different flavors. There's ones that are owned by the investors, the big ones, usually the bigger ones, that's like Duke and, Exelon and PG&E, et cetera, Southern California Edison. And those are regulated, they have state regulators. So, the regulators are obviously independent, and then there's ones that are more governed by they're called municipal utilities or munis, and they're governed by their like city council almost. LADWP, SMUD, SRP, things like that. And then there's ones that are owned by their customers, and that might cause people to scratch their head. But that's primarily rural ones. That farmers or whoever, like it's the actual people that are kind of own and operate their own tri-state, and its co-ops are a good example of that. I mean, that's getting a bit nuanced, but the point is that, and then there's ones that are like semi-government, like TVA and Bonneville, and whether they serve the end customer or if there's like a distribution utility in between them that's regional. So again, I probably lost 98% of your audience, but yeah, that's kind of the gross division of
Yes.
utilities in North America. And you're right,
I
in
think
Europe it's different.
yeah, I think that's important to note because I mean there are so many different entities that have to have their own approach. So it's not, a blanket approach for everyone. There's different ways that they're owned and managed, and that is a challenge in itself. So I just wanted to kind of note that complexity, whether or not you understand all the ways that utilities can be owned and run and ran, there's multiple ways throughout your different states and regions.
Yeah.
One thing, of course, that I want to consider is that kind of what we talked about at the beginning is that utilities have so much to benefit from by just moving into how to adapt to the EVs on the road, whether it's fleet or passenger. So just in case folks don't know, because it is complicated, but how does the money flow work? Especially if, it's always, how are you going to make some revenue, right? How are we going to keep this business model running when it comes down to most everything in our world? So how do utilities make money off of charging? I know it's expensive for charge point operators to put these chargers in. Sometimes they lose money when you charge, actually. So there's things like risk to the CPOs, but also risk to the utilities maybe. And I know this maybe will incorporate, maybe you'll mention demand charges or often on peak times, but can you kind of explain that a little bit?
Oh, sure. So, utilities make money in different ways. We talked about the structure in the very beginning. So the simplest version is a utility. There's some utilities who are just like any other company. The more of their product they sell, the more money they make. So that's one bucket of utilities. The next bucket of utilities aren't like that. And your audience is either probably are already scratching their head or they stood up and got a cup of coffee or something. But the point is that they are actually incentivized to sell less electricity. And you're like, well, how does that make sense? Well, how they make money is they put together a 2 or 3 year plan and they present it to their regulators. And they basically say, hey, regulators, we expect in the next 3 years to sell this much electricity. And includes this much rate of return to the stockholders if they're a investor-owned utility. And it's going to take this much for our operations. And then there's this much for inflation and maintenance and yada, yada, yada. So that's the other form. And then that's for the two forms of investor-owned utilities. And then for the ones that are owned by either like the city governments or the ones that are owned by like kind of the rural members, those ones try to break even every year. So they only charge as much for electricity as it takes to cover their costs. So in all of those models, it's just important to remember that everyone is trying to minimize their costs as much as possible. So that's another great thing about electric vehicles is, again, because most of them, again, not all, but most sit around so much, is you can actually delay charging to times when there already is it's called excess grid capacity, but basically there aren't other, middle of the night, basically for most times when most of us are asleep, not everyone. So that's the idea is that you can move more electricity through the system using, call it either the system of today or minimally investing in the system. And that's how utilities either quote unquote make money if that's their business model, or for the ones that are municipal, like how they keep costs down is basically, you move more product through your existing system. So your benefits increase and your costs are either zero or not zero, but minimal.
Okay, interesting. So then what does that mean about the relationship between these utilities that have this structure, this kind of goal, and the charge point operators that are putting in the infrastructure, buying the energy from the utilities, selling it to their customers, that interaction?
Yeah, so I mean, it's state by state on how that's all regulated. But grossly speaking, the private network operators are just like any other customer. They buy the electricity from the utility at standard rates that we all pay, and then either, depending on the regulatory structure, they have flexibility in what they set the pricing as, or they have to basically pass through the electricity cost. Now, just like other businesses, they can add on services to that. If that's part of their business model, think of everything from like a parking fee to you get a special spot at the front of it. There's different ways to kind of slice and dice this. In addition, some of the private network companies obviously have the data as part of their business model, and how they use that it's unclear to me. But the charging data and all that, just like the grocery store and everything, it's a lot about customer data too. So there's companies that look at that part of the customer here, but that's well beyond the utility scope. That's the private industry.
Do you have an idea of which of the public charge point operators seem to be working best with utilities to expand their infrastructure?
From that relationship side, I mean, the utilities and the private networks, there's like the big six, and then there's a bunch more. have worked well. And then, just like we saw with solar, like as these technologies scale up, that there's processes that work really well to a certain point, and then they need to change and things like that. So I think I would ask the private charging network, because they're the actually one on the customer end of that. But I do know they have worked. That going back to the like the Ecotality and Coulomb and Better Place days. They've been working with the utilities for going back 14, 15 years now, and some even go back to the 90s, even longer than that.
Long relationships, and I know that. I used to be a part of a public infrastructure team, and just the relationships, you're right, that you have with utilities, that can obviously help, having worked with them and knowing how they work, but it is regional. The utilities have to go through all of their processes to get your site permitted and up and running and all of the things that it needs. And that can usually be what is keeping a site from going live in a short amount of time, because maybe you can get it all in there, but actually getting power to the site, that's a whole story. And of course, that depends on location and everything, which, I'd love to touch on. I don't know about this podcast, but, again, it's the differences between the urban setting, small town, and in the middle of nowhere, and how that can differ and whether it's intuitive or not. So maybe let's move to level 2 charging. So level 2 EV charging is, from projections I've seen, this is going to be the majority of charging that we need to account for the EVs that are going to be on the road throughout the next decade. So what are the challenges associated with level 2 charging, specifically from what you found in your research from a utility perspective? For example, I know there's a lot of efforts in California to electrify school buses. So if a local school district wanted to put in a bunch of chargers, what would stand in the way of that?
So there's a semi-joke in the industry when it comes to, charging that you install in a parking lot, whether that's for a school bus yard or for just like your work parking lot, like dig once. So the good news is that the charging related to level 2 in the US, and before you kind of get to the adapter piece, is largely due to construction. It's like ripping up the parking lot, putting in conduit, that sort of thing. And I'm being kind of facetious about the dig once, but it is oversize your conduit, which is the pipes that the wires run through and all that kind of stuff. Because by the time it gets to the stub where the charging station plugs in, that's the bulk of the expense. And then making sure you have enough on-site transformers and things like that. The actual charging box is the good news. There's quite a few to pick from. They're actually quite simple when it comes to the technology, and there's a lot of safety built in, both via the standards, et cetera. So that the charging box, which is the piece that the industry that we all focused on a lot, is actually I won't say the easy part, but it's the construction is the challenging part. And then in the context of school buses, and thankfully, the EPA just recently released a slew, I want to say it was $1 billion for 67 different school districts or something like that last week. There's money coming, but it's school money is tight, whether you're private business, but especially in government, especially at schools. So how do you not only, give them the funds to do what they need to do, but also everyone's overloaded. So how do you share expertise and lessons learned? And that's one of the roles that there's a bunch of groups out there, but the utilities are one of the groups providing that kind of customer education to, school districts on hey, here's how you electrify a parking lot if you're trying to do schools, or if you're trying to do it for your teachers and staff, here's another way to do it, that sort of thing.
Okay. Interesting. So do you agree level 2 will be the most ubiquitous kind of charging that we need to electrify our fleets, our passenger vehicles, our transportation?
It is the foundation for many use cases, or for many different types of vehicles, to be plain talk. Obviously we talked about the residential charging before for many fleets, including, and that was the other lesson learned. Just because a vehicle is big doesn't necessarily mean it needs high power charging. School bus is a perfect example. Goes out and back twice a day, sits around quite a bit. Yes, it's big, but it just needs to charge. We've done demonstrations with school buses across the country, other groups have, and we found that even kind of a mid-power level 2 charging station, call it 12 kilowatts, is more than sufficient. You don't have to do, DC fast charging for school buses. There might be cases where the customer might want to do that, but it's not a must. You're not talking about an 18-wheeler, tens of
Yeah,
thousands of pounds trying to drive from Maine to San Diego, right? It's a different use case.
that's true. I think that sometimes folks can get caught up on like, oh my gosh, well, if everything's electric, then they're going to need so much energy. But you're right. Like a lot of EVs will sit around for most part of the day, which brings me to a subject that I am just always looking to learn more about, and that's vehicle to grid or vehicle to everything technology, which is where essentially, our EVs are a big battery on wheels, which means that they can store energy, they can take energy in, but also it can go the other way. That's where we hear the word bidirectional. So if you can feed it back into something else, whether it's another EV, your home, or perhaps the grid, this is super, super interesting to me. So, one part of this is it's great potential, right? But are we there? So, how do you view vehicle to grid? Is it the future? Is it just a nice idea? Or is it really a key to making the switch to a heavily electric transportation system?
So, I kind of see it as a staircase. There's managed charging where no power flows back from the vehicle, and how do you make it easy on the customer? Customer gets home from work, plugs the car into their garage or outlet, whatever the charging station, goes in the house and gets on with their life. And then like all the fancy stuff in the background, as long as the car is charged by, I call it 5 a.m. on the weekdays, and 7 a.m. on the weekends, like it's just done. And whatever, hey, utility and free market and all your other players involved, you do what you need to do and just adjust my charging. Again, this is all one way. As long as it doesn't matter if you trickle charge me or, increase that or what have you. It's like the car's done in the morning, and that's all I care about. And then, you always got to give the customer too, like the opt out button. Like if, you're a family and the wife's pregnant or somebody's sick, like there's going to be cases where it's like, I want my car charged now. And then you kind of have that optionality too, which we've done pilots and kind of seen that done. And then that leads to, vehicle to home or vehicle to building where you're putting power back. The power outage is a great example there. I'm sure we've all heard stories of the electric pickup trucks, providing power back.
Exactly.
And then there's, vehicle to grid where the EV is actually putting power back, and it's either used locally at the distribution level or potentially even one day like moved back and done like transmission. And then there's different. Again, this gets super technical, but it's not just about moving the electricity. It's also kind of like the rate that the electricity moves around and how quickly. So it's called balancing. I always think about it. It's like if you have trying to balance like a piece of something on your finger, like that's the grid, right? Supply and demand has to be matched. So EVs potentially could play a role there. From the technical side, it can be done today. You can move electricity any way you need to. It's more, how do you do it safely at scale and easy for the customer, and then in a way that everyone who's involved wins. And that's what these pilots and demonstrations around the world are trying to figure out. What's the kind of 80-20 rule? Like what are the 5 key things that are functions that are needed on the grid to like minimize cost as this scales up? And then what are the 5 things needed on the EV that are needed? And what's the feature set in order to make those 5 things on the grid happen? That's kind of the gist of the V2G stuff. So like, do we have to wait for V2G to happen in order to have EVs at scale? No. Is it something we're looking at in parallel? Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good point, is that it's something to consider. We don't necessarily need it, but it does have a lot of potential for, just capturing more energy. Do you think that there will be, we also think about it in terms of impact, like, if you're able to take cheap energy or renewable energy at a certain time and then put it back on the grid, all this stuff. But do you think there will be enough interoperability and vehicles cooperating to make a significant impact from this kind of technology, V2G?
So that's the vision. And we can think now, and again, it has to be easy and invisible and reliable to the customer, but it's like, you can think now, the grid is changing, and there's like, as more and more renewables come on the grid. I know you mentioned that at the beginning, it's like sun peaks, in the middle of the day, like lunchtime. And I'm old enough to remember, like, you'll laugh at me here, but like free long distance calling, like free nights and weekends, and it's like, I can imagine a future where EV charging has like, I don't know, free lunchtime charging or cheap, inexpensive, because that's when the electricity is the cheapest, right? And similarly, like, again, the vision is to make all this seamless at the back end, such that like, okay, well, if it's a hot summer evening and everyone gets home and the air conditioners are cranked, then like, whatever, pick a number. Everyone shares 10% of their battery just to kind of get, quote unquote, the grid in the neighborhood through those peak hours until it starts to cool off later at night, right? And then you can just recharge your car. Now, again, like you got to have that optionality so people can opt out of it. You can't, that kind of thing. But again, the private industry and the utility industry, everyone who's working on this is aware of those things. So that's the vision. Yeah, it's like as the grids change and the needs change, like how do you match customer needs with grid needs, all in a way that's seamless and reliable.
So it seems like this could be a great option. We technically can do it and probably will do it, but from things that I've read about and spoken to businesses that work in this space, especially working with the utilities to one day make V2G available, is that there's a lot of steps in between. And a lot of that is updating like the systems that utilities use, but also finding a value proposition, like you're saying, where the utilities can offer their customers something that is it's like a smart home. They don't have to think about it, but the utilities can benefit, the grid can benefit, but the customer like has a charge car when they need to. So what do you see that, is it true? I mean, like kind of what I found, which is that utilities need updates to get there. And if so, what might those be?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways to think about it, at least the ways I think about it. Like it's like, what do we do? Call it, if we draw a line in the sand from today going forward, like what do we do for, call it new construction or fresh construction, things like that? And then what do we do for all the existing buildings and cars and infrastructure? And that's a balance, right? It's far easier to start from scratch if you're doing something like that than it is to like retrofit a house, retrofit an existing structure. So that's the challenge. And if the social goal or societal goals are trying to electrify as quickly as possible for various reasons, and like how do we attack those existing structures? I think one of the most challenging use cases that we have here in the States, and it's probably similar globally, is like how do you support folks who live in an apartment that don't have a dedicated parking spot? Not even an apartment, just anything that's not a house that has a driveway or a garage of some kind, right? So how do you support the apartments and townhomes and people who street park? What are the ways to support that? Now, if you look at different corners of the world, there's been different ways to attack that. So it's not impossible. It's definitely a challenge. It's like how do you support that existing like building stock and set of customers who live there that can't park in their garage overnight or don't go into work and can sit where their cars park 8 hours a day or that sort of thing. So that's I think one of the major challenges.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I feel like there's always a challenge in this space in every facet, and we just keep learning how to research and address them from what we find. So of course, level 2 charging is really important, but also fast charging. This is a hot topic, right? If you're driving an EV or not, you've heard about the fast charging infrastructure. I mean, maybe I'm also in this bubble all the time, as are you. So we hear about this every day and talk about it every day. But in contrast to the level 2 challenges that you were just speaking to, what are the distinct obstacles with DC fast charging, that utilities have to deal with?
Well, I mean, I think for fast charging, there's a variety of challenges and there's also a bit of good news. And on the good news side of it, again, it's like, on one hand, this is just yet another customer load. So it's, utilities are set up to do this. Now, the question comes for timing. Like when and where are these charging stations going in? And are they going in at a Buc-ee's? Are they going in at a gas station? Or are they going in kind of on their own accord, next to you pick your favorite fast food chain or what have you. So there's various things there. And like, what is the kind of surrounding utility infrastructure? It's, again, utilities can pull power nearly anywhere, but it's going to take a lot longer in a downtown urban area than it is like out in the middle of, at the risk of stating the obvious, out in the middle of a field, right? So that's next to a transmission line. So I think that's the challenge. But again, that's all largely, that's all over, that can be overcome. One of the challenges I think is there's a variety of private companies out there. There's a variety of models. Some of in the utilities have done quite a few programs supporting like all the behind the scenes infrastructure, leaving the actual like charging box or charging plaza to the responsibility of the site host or the shopping mall or again fast food restaurant or private charging network, what have you. But that doesn't stop the utilities from getting blamed when something goes wrong. So I mean that's just life. Yeah. But I mean that's also another challenge, I would say, is the the PR. And then like taking a giant step back is like, as people consider buying an electric vehicle, utilities ask themselves, well, what's our role in educating our customer on electric vehicles, the costs and benefits, and like, the emotional benefits as much as the quantitative ones. And then, quickly it's like, how do you get into fueling? Like we're all used to, putting gas or diesel into our car. That's a straightforward process. Whether it's good or bad is another question. But having to explain to someone like, oh yeah, you charge, and then there's different prices and, time of use. And like, that's just more than the average customer probably wants to hear. I mean, the way I talk about it is like, you can buy food at the grocery store, and that's a certain price and a certain level if you need it last minute, or if you're out at the movies and you're grabbing something from the snack bar, you're gonna pay a different price, but you're also paying for kind of the location or the specificity or the timing of it, right? So that's kind of how electricity is in some ways.
Yeah.
But again, like you just don't want to make it too complicated. We have enough complexity in our lives.
Yeah, I like that analogy. And I do think that is something that is unfortunately unavoidable, which at this point in the EV transition is that you might pull up to a charger one day and get a slower charge than before. And you're like, why is this happening? But if you don't have, the knowledge, the information to educate yourself, it might just be like, I don't know why, but it wasn't a great experience, and there's kind of the argument that we shouldn't not everyone should have to know all these nerdy details, but that is just where we are. So we keep a positive perspective, right? So with your work, you've kind of said that you don't necessarily like tell entities what to do, but instead just provide them with the information. But do utilities come to you and when you work with them and say, this is the problem we want to do, we want to put in more DC fast charging, how do we do it? Then what would be your response in how you work with them? Would it just be, well, here's our research, interpret?
No, that's and we actually have like, that's a perfect example. So if they have like strategic questions, we have a set of product offerings and experts on the team that kind of help walk through them along with their strategic experts. Like, hey, this is our local, wherever they are in the country, this is kind of our state and local and regional policy or lack thereof. This is our own internal strategy on what we want to do. So we kind of walk them through that. And then all the way to the point where it's like, what are the literally costs and benefits of either supporting or, there's kind of a spectrum of how much a utility is involved in charging infrastructure, right? Everything from supporting like any other electric load all the way up to owning and operating it and maintaining, and then there's a bunch in the middle. So we have specific offerings for that. We have, again, technical experts on our team who have installed stations in the field, again, whether it's a parking lot or a fast charge. So they know, again, I talked about the standards folks. So we have vehicle experts on our team. So like, whatever the question they have, we usually have an answer. And if we don't, then we're like, well, go talk to these folks over there at, you name the organization or national lab, because that's their area of expertise. Like we have no, that's how it works. Like we're all in this together, right? It takes a village.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. This is the space of collaboration. And if you're not collaborating, I don't know if you're really part of it. I mean, you're not going to benefit, and there's just so much benefit to give out with that working together. And you mentioned something that kind of transitions into my next point, which is the role of regulation and policy. So of course we large scale have NEVI funding, and that's some kind of regulation and federal incentives to build out the charging infrastructure. And then there's the collaboration of regulators and lawmakers. But like you were saying, some places don't have any policy regarding EV charging infrastructure, and they're building it for the first time, and their teams are working it with it for the first time. And then there's, cities and states that have been kind of working in this for longer and have it built up. So what policy changes do you think could help improve the expansion of any EV charging infrastructure? I don't know if it really becomes distinct between level 2 and fast charging, but yeah, what do you think there?
I don't know about specific policies. And again, EPRI can't really comment on policy, but I think, again, at the risk of stating the obvious, one of the major opportunities right now that the entire industry is looking at is like, how do we ensure that the customer experience with public fast charging, especially because that's so critical, especially now that the vehicles, it used to be like the vehicles were regional, and that's fine. So if something hiccuped, you could still get home because you weren't far from home. But now that we're, I know Kyle and others have driven across the country a bunch of times, like on EVs, like you could, like if that station doesn't work, like that's a serious problem, right? And then that's even before you start thinking about fleets and goods and services. So how do you ensure that the customer fast charging experience is, there's so much focus before on time. Like, how much time does it take? And I kind of learned that, like, that's not really a problem. It's more about, like, how do you ensure it's reliable and easy, right?
Exactly.
I think
that it works.
And it works. So it's the customer experience coupled with the ongoing operations and maintenance. So that's, I would say, even bigger picture than any one specific policy, but that's a major thing. And then, along the lines of the customer experience, one might, from the data anyway, looking at all the automakers, I think all have signed up now for NACS, right? Like they all basically say like, okay, well, that wasn't working. So let's take advantage. People can say what they want about Tesla, but like their charging network coupled with their car was a seamless experience. So the other OEMs took a look at that and decided that like, okay, well, we'll take you up on your offer to be part of it. Now there's going to be a bunch of work that's needed in between. Like, okay, we all have the same connector to like, we all have the same experience. So lots of work to be done in the next few years.
Yeah, that's the part too.
That is, people were joking that the common connector is just the key that unlocks the door. Now you got to open the door and go in and get the work done, right? So
exactly,
a lot of work there to go. So again, like going back to like what policies grow the market, it's a combination of that of having that infrastructure, and then again, I think the other gap in the market for the longest time was if you look at like the top 25 best-selling vehicles in the U.S., which again are predominantly crossovers and SUVs and trucks. The question that people ask is like, well, how many of those have either a plug-in option or a plug-in equivalent, right? Roughly speaking. And for the longest time, there were great plugins on the market, but they kind of fell into two camps, like city-ish cars, local cars, call them that. And then the higher end, kind of luxury sedans, right? Or luxury class sedans. And those were great if the customer was in the market for those. But if you wanted like a 2-row crossover, there really weren't that many. Right. No. And now the good news in the last couple of years is the more and more have come out in the market. Obviously, the electric pickup trucks have all largely made their launch. And, there's a plug-in hybrid one coming from Ram next year, I think. So that'll be interesting to kind of see how that works out for the hardcore towers. Anyway, the point is like there's more and more customer choice now in the flavors of vehicles that we Americans like. So that will in turn open up more customers that previously might not even been in the market. They might not have been anti-EV, but if there's just not a vehicle for them to purchase that plugs in, then they're just not going to consider it, right? So I think that is another change we're seeing in the market. So it's like, it's something I know we as an institute or we as a department are keeping a close eye on, is like, how does that change and impact, the vehicle choice, expanded vehicle choice? How does that translate to more adoption, and then what does that adoption mean for charging behavior? And at the beginning, like bigger vehicles, more weight, higher power charging, level 2. What does that change, if anything, as far as basically bigger air conditioners coming onto the grid?
Yeah. Okay. Interesting kind of ripple effect of figuring out where the origin of the big like influence will come from. And it's true, we have more and more options on the market for an EV that can be adopted into your lifestyle that fits it, and are just like your gateway EV kind of. And I was even talking to someone where it'll be like someone's first EV will be the Cybertruck, even though it's an insane piece of machinery or whatever, that will be someone's introduction into the EV world because it's so weird. Like, or maybe it was the smart car, whatever it is, you got your way in. Do you drive an EV?
We have had a variety of EVs in our family, which have changed as we now have 3 kids. So we start off with the Fiat 500e, had an i3 with a range extender. Right now, we have an electric cargo bike that we use, and nice. We have a hybrid station wagon, and we're in the market for an electric city car. So we'll see what the next one will be.
Oh, do you have anything you're especially considering or waiting for?
It looks like my wife wants a Tesla, and I'm more interested in like the Mini. I think it's the Mini Aceman or something along that line. But we need something small. Need is in air quotes. We would need more of a city car. My wife really likes the sedan. I'm more of a hatchback person, so we'll kind of see how that goes. But for right now, having the bike actually gets us around quite well. We're lucky we live in a spot that has good public transit too, so that helps. So nice. We drive, we walk, we bike, and I recognize, having lived in the suburbs and having lived in rural areas, I get that like my current zip code is not reflective of much of the country.
Yep. That is true. I mean, when it comes to getting around, it can really change based on where you are. And cool to hear that you've actually had a couple different EVs. So we'll have to see what you two end up deciding on as your next one to welcome into the family. But one thing I definitely want to make sure we touch on is renewable energies. So there's one issue with renewable energies, and that is that they're intermittent, right? Wind comes and goes, sun comes and goes. Hydro, I guess you can manipulate that more on your own, but I want to talk to you about how this can maybe alleviate pressure on the grid. So in your research, have you found that we're moving towards renewable energy production and use in a way that will be able to support the EV transition?
That's a great question. Those are two major trends, parallel trends going on. Not the only two, but two major ones going on right now in the energy industry. The amount of solar and the amount of renewables in all of its diverse forms continues to increase, just as the amount of EVs continue to increase. And again, going back to the good news, why EVs can be a quote unquote asset to the grid is they sit around parks. There's so many of them sit around parks so much. So with a little technology and kind of some thought laid into turn the EVs into a platform, they can be integrated into the grid. Again, first and foremost, got to meet customer needs. And secondly, be a grid asset. Got to be crystal clear on that. But the potential for EVs as a grid asset is very high, especially at scale. So are we there today? No. Like, we're getting there. There's different pilots and programs around the world that have looked at this and shown the potential. So now it's a question of like, okay, as this scales, what needs to happen? What are the minimum functionality and communication, all in a cybersecurity way that need to happen to integrate EVs into the grid?
Okay, so it could be a reality, but in order to create it, to create a realistic system or network that by design charges EVs like only based off of the excess renewable energy generation or really relies on renewable energy, it requires not only customer first thought, which we've harped on a lot and which totally makes sense, but all of the systems in place to make that happen. Does that seem like I'm catching that well?
Yeah, that's a good way to summarize it.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So, just thinking about like households like yours that have multiple EVs, I just always start thinking about all the little microgrids that we could make everywhere. And, maybe I'm a little thinking of a utopia of renewable energies,
Sure.
But I do love to talk about that there is potential and we're on our way there. And like from your perspective, you're like, yeah, we can get there. Maybe it's not today. Maybe it is technically today. We could do some things, but that we're moving in that direction at least, which I love to hear. And of course, this space there's misinformation, right? It's misinformation out there around the EV space and the transition to electric. And with your years of experience and the research of you and your team on this industry, what would you want folks kind of to take away as where we are right now, or just kind of an idea about the space? What do you want folks to come away from this conversation with?
First and foremost is like, there are EVs out there today and more coming in a variety of flavors that appeal to more and more of us as Americans, so there might be one out there for you. I would say electric vehicles, from the customer perspective, the feedback that many drivers say, like, they're just simply better. You hear this from like diehard car zealots who like grew up on carburetors and things like that. They're like, it's hard to beat the advantages of an electric motor. Instant torque, smooth, quiet, zippy, like all that kind of like punchiness coupled with the luxury and stillness. We've heard like, some of the luxury brands, like, that's been their reputation for decades. It's like more than adequate performance, and luxury. And it's like the electric motor just delivers that, just from the pure factor. It's just kind of hard to touch, right? Now, granted, there's going to be a portion of the population that, they're just not going to have to change, right? And that's okay. But for everyone else, there's a lot of options out there and more coming. So I would say that's the first thing. The second thing is charging can be as simple as installing a dryer outlet in where you park your car. Yeah. And then buy a box and you're done. That's as simple as as you need it to be. And there's a great support network out there. There's a lot of information online, YouTube, or things to read and things like that. So there's a lot of help. So it's a great on the individual customer side. It's just like simply about, and that kind of dovetails into the commercial industrial side. So there's also more and more options for fleet customers. There's some articles this week on the early data from Amazon using the using the Rivian vans and what they've seen for charging levels, and and kind of in their use case, there's Navkeys does this great run on less. They're interviewing and kind of quantifying different fleets that are demoing around the country that are demoing the big electric trucks, and you'll hear everything from fleet managers to drivers. So the point is like, to also remember, this change is going to be gradual, right? It's not it's change in the past, whether it's to smartphones or flat screen TVs, seems like it was instant, but it took time. And these are vehicles that are expensive that aren't replaced that frequently, right? So it's going to take time. The experience of the vehicles is, the feedback from the drivers, again, whether it's been individual fleets, been great, and it's only going to get better. And that's thanks to a lot of hard work of people behind the scenes.
Yeah, I love that. I don't mean to focus on all the challenges, but what I'm trying to do when I highlight those is like, also, okay, we've acknowledged the challenges and this is how we're combating them, because I know we're in a transition, and a lot of what we're focusing on is like, how do we get to where we're going? So I think it's so cool that not only are you seeing true transition happening, and that, it's with the collaboration, and then that you all can provide this independent research and voice, and just collaboration with utilities. I mean, y'all have also a lot of facets at EPRI that you're working with to advance us for a better tomorrow, which I love, that mission oriented foundation that you're on. But in order to move towards this electric future, or a future where there's cleaner air and cleaner water and all that stuff, and I feel like, yeah, we truly could talk about so many aspects of this very complicated industry for a long time. And I really appreciate your expertise. And I think this is such an interesting part of it, the energy, because everyone uses energy every day, and we don't have to think about it. But moving into this space of things becoming more electric, it's kind of like an art and a science of figuring out how we can make it so seamless, right? And so I think your work can obviously attribute to that as well. And it was great meeting other members of your team today. So I'm really glad that you actually reached out to us at the podcast, and we're like, hey, I listen, as you said, longtime listener, first time caller, which we love. And you speak of collaboration too, and we love to collaborate on the Out of Spec team. And I'm not an expert in most of what we cover, but I'm like gathering all this information and painting a clearer and clearer picture of where we stand today. And I really appreciate your time to come on and explain a lot of this to me. And hopefully we'll have you on again in the future.
Yeah, I would love to. That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I really appreciate it. I would love to see your car line up, of course, and see what you all end up going with. But also, if we ever come out to where you are, or have any other collaboration that we could do, I would love to do that. I'm sure our audience will have questions for you in the comments as well. So I'll encourage those, and we'll see if we can get any answers for them. But also, is there any work that you all are working towards in 2024 that you want to share with me that we can keep an eye out for?
I think the big thing is what we mentioned at the beginning is like that giant initiative, the EVs to Scale 2030. Like, that is just a huge collaborative with everything from Freightliner and Daimler and Amazon and a bunch of other fleets, and the national labs and the joint office, and close to 24 different utilities, really trying to get at that, like, where are these major loads coming on the transportation side in the next 2030 is not that far away, like 6 years, which is a blink of an eye in the utility world. And like, how do we get that data, again, protected, such that utilities can quickly and precisely invest today, such that they're meeting the loads of tomorrow? So that's really excited for that project. And again, that, I just listed off a bunch of different folks there, and my apologies for whoever I missed, but really excited at that, because I think that will be an extremely useful and practical solution amongst the portfolio of solutions that the industry needs.
Man, you're kind of trying to predict the future there.
Yeah, well, doing the best we can based on data. So that's the goal.
We love that. We love our data over here. This has been so great to speak with you, Dan. I really, really do appreciate it and find this so interesting. And I really want to keep going into this topic of energy, how we make it, where it comes from, how we're going to use it, and what are the innovative ways that we're trying to make a closed loop in this sector, and then all the different markets. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thanks. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for tuning into the Out of Spec podcast. We will catch you next time.
Bye.